All right, I think we are ready to go. So welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a wonderful break. I know for some of you, this is only day 2 back, and for some of you, you came back last week already. And hopefully it was a healthy break. We're hearing from lots of people who had a break, but they were in bed doing it. So I'm hopeful that that's not the situation for all of you as well. So we are looking at Earth systems. This is our session 4. So we have one more to go in March. And then we'll be doing a little bit of an update to some of these and doing a little bit of a round 2 of it, not looking exactly the same. So we're going to add a few pieces in. So we'll just give you the heads up on some of that right now. But what we'd like to do now is kind of the same process we have in the past. Some of you are new to us, and so this is your very first time that you're coming to the session. We had some people sign up before Christmas, but we also have people that have only been coming to certain sessions because those are the only ones that they're doing in the pilot, and we totally get that. So welcome to those of you who are new. My name is Chris Sarsky. I'm one of the consultants with the CARC Consortia, and my great partner is Ted, and I'll let Ted introduce himself as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ted Zeroni. I'm a consultant with the Edmonton Regional Learning Consortium in Edmonton, and I'm working out of Sherwood Park today. Welcome, everyone.
And I am working out of Camrose at the moment. That's not where I was all day today. I've been on the road, so it's been an interesting day. Let's begin with our land acknowledgement. In the spirit of reconciliation, we want to acknowledge that this gathering is taking place on traditional lands across the province of Alberta, home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We acknowledge that this land is a traditional meeting ground, giving voice to its original peoples and the story of creation of this country in a way that history has forgotten. And so we are talking about Earth systems, and as every session that we've started so far, whenever we've done the land acknowledgement, I've tried to incorporate a little bit of the Indigenous perspectives. And for those of you who are working in the field and have a lot of integration of that already in your curriculums, you know the importance that land plays to the First Nations peoples. There is no way that land is not connected in their world, both in their living world and in their spiritual world. And so it is imperative for them that they see that as one part of their universe. So I'm going to play a very short piece. It's going to talk a little bit about, again, the perspectives of land and the importance of land. This is a video that would be more related to you as the adults, not necessarily one that we would show to the grade 1 students or kindergarten students. We used the same one yesterday. However, there would be pieces out of this that you would be able to grab and certainly use in your explanations to students. It's about 4.5 minutes long, so we're going to turn it on. For those of you who saw it yesterday, this is a good time to go grab a coffee.
I believe we have to respect our medicinal plants. We have to respect this earth for what it produces for us.
We've been on the landscape. As far as the archaeological record goes, based on radiocarbon dating and the tools and weapons and things is 12,000 years.
We got our food from the animals and the plants and the berries, and we respected that land as a matter of survival.
Land-based teachings is all about the land itself. And when I invite children, students, teachers, parents to come and understand that, it's not me just telling them, it's the nature. And land-based teachings is more of a hands-on rather than just sitting there listening to you, someone, or looking at, the screen to observe.
survey your land and see what's there, the richness and the wealth of especially medicines, and save those plants because you can't transplant them for future use. And if you just remove them, then what have you got? There's nothing left.
You know, the whole landscape is imbued with knowledge and history and the story of the Blackfoot people. I bring a lot of students and children and teachers out to these sites and share the origin, the creation stories, and the actual location of these places.
For the Métis, Lake St. Anne is so dear to all of us because that's where our spirit is and our ancestors.
You have to be there at the site of the story to get a better grasp and feel of it. And the kids are just spiritually moved, and it's a real good life learning lesson.
So it's just been so rewarding for the children and for my heart.
So 2 of our First Nations and 1 of our Métis settlements actually provide land-based learning for our students, and this is completely done by the elders and knowledge keepers. And all the time our elders are talking to us about all the different teachings that the children will go through in that program so that our teachers can embed that into their other curriculum pieces.
Every time we have an elder in to come and do professional development for us, it's always about or comes down to the land. And that's what I say to principals. It comes down to the land. If you'd like to have really effective learning, try and do it in the environment.
Being able to go outside and learn our practices, like how to make bannock, how to hunt, how to bead, how to make our regalia for our dances. I believe strongly we should be learning this already.
And when you go out in a land base, you connect to nature. You create that balance where you could feel, touch, and see. And that's the uniqueness about land-based teaching, is that you want to make that connection. Because ideally, nature will put you in your place and make you realize who you are as a human being, and that we can walk in this world in harmony, not only with each other, but with nature.
Okay, I'm just going to go out of this one here. So that gives you a little bit of a sense, again, just to...
I believe we have to respect our
Oops, let's stop there.
medicinal.
We don't need that again. We want to make sure that we're always cognizant of the fact that with land, anything that has to do with land, especially when we just finished living systems, and we did that at the beginning, even when we talked about matter, there's always land involved in some way, shape, or form, whether it's looking at the security of the land, the safety of the land, the respect of the land. When we talked about recycling, reusing, all of those different pieces and components always come back to the land. So it always comes back to this discussion about the importance of the connection and relationship that First Nations people have with the land. And so we've got to be cognizant of that and make sure that we embed that into our teaching as we move through. Okay, so when we are going through our sessions today, again, as we've always said, and for those of you who are new, what we're hopeful for is that whatever you're coming away from this session, we know that there aren't a lot of resources available. It's kind of being unfolded a little bit differently than we're used to. So we're hopeful that you feel at least a level of comfort and empowerment, that you have resources that you can use, maybe combine with materials that you already have, or gained at least a better understanding of a certain area that maybe you didn't have a lot of background knowledge in, that you'll be able to move forward with the students. So having that confidence, a sense of direction, and some efficacy around this particular topic and any other one that we've looked at so far. In our sessions, we're pretty laid back in the sense that if you have a question, please don't hesitate to unmute yourself and just ask. You don't have to wait for us to say, anybody got a question? And I'll say that because normally we don't even have time to ask that kind of a question. So just jump in, or if you feel more comfortable doing it in the chat box, then feel free to do that. I mean, that's not a problem as well. So our agenda for sort of this unpacking that we're going to look at in Earth systems is really, again, having a look at the framework, not the general generic pieces of the framework, but the specific cusps, the specific understanding skills and processes surrounding Earth systems. And again, Ted will unpack that for you from the perspective of the concepts and that notion of how are we going to best assess those and what are the things that we're assessing. Not everything in this particular row of cusp is equally as important. We'll look at those instructional assessment considerations, and then I'll finish up with sort of some examples and a possible way that you might be able to unpack the unit, give you some ideas, some resources that you can use, and hopefully that will give you a good starting point if this is where your first sort of unit is going to be. So we haven't really changed anything here. We're still looking at the organizing ideas being in the overarching, talking about the concept, talking about where I find that big rock, and it gives me that umbrella that's opened up that covers many grades. As I unpack grade 1, I'm going to get more specific to it. So I'm going to turn it over to Ted now, who's going to talk a little bit about the components that we have here, and then I'll let him move right into his sections.
All right, thanks, Chris. When it comes to the organizing ideas, you can see through this graphic that there are, what is that, it's 8 organizing ideas. They're taken across the grade. Well, space doesn't start until grade 3, so grade 1, you won't see that coming for. You won't see that in your curriculum, but you'll see all the other organizing ideas. Now, besides if you can go to the next slide, Chris, just sort of a reminder that as we go through this curriculum or any curriculum, whether it be the old one and you're doing some of the old science parts and some of your other older curricula and other subjects, that these things are what's expected to be in what we do as teachers every day. We address the competencies, some of the basic literacy progressions and numeracy progressions, and you can see them there. Because at the end of the day, if we don't pay heed to those, some of those things which are probably the most important things that our kids are going to walk away be addressed. Those competencies and literacy skills and any skills and knowledge and concepts that we learn throughout our grade school and into high school, we hope that what they take with them is something they can transfer to the everyday lives. And so, next slide, please, Chris. Perhaps that may be the way I want to start or the lens through which I want to look at how we view the curriculum, is that idea of transfer, that if it really is our collective goal to help students learn the understanding, generate the understanding, create the understandings, and learn the skills and competencies that are necessary and useful and needed as they leave our schoolrooms, then we need to probably pay attention to what we are doing in our classroom with our instruction and assessment to assist with transfer, because transfer doesn't happen. It is a purposeful, intentional journey. And so I'm going to be unpacking this curriculum as friend part with Transfer Mind. How do we instruct so that we can transfer our concepts and skills with what we do in the classroom? Next slide, please, Chris. Just to review maybe a little bit what I mean by transfer, we're talking about transferring a skill. Students should be able to know what a skill is, be able to identify, be able to know when it's useful, when to bring it up. So in this situation, we might have a friend thinking about reading a novel that you just read, and you wonder, well, what would be the most useful to help that person decide whether they would be interested in reading this novel? And so we'd have a lot of things we could choose from. We could maybe evaluate the novel or compare and contrast it and synthesize it. But we choose the skill based on what we know is going to be most helpful to help that student understand what's in the book. And that perhaps might be to summarize the novel for that person. So transfer has a lot of ways. We can not only transfer skills, but we can transfer certain knowledge pieces. So if we take a look at these photos, take a look, no matter which one you look at, you may see perspective in that photo. You could see ecosystem, design, creativity, wealth. Can you see brain power? Can you see quantity? Probably the only thing you can't really see there is brain. And really the reason for that is that brain is a fairly specific idea or thought. It's an organ in our body. It's a specific thing. And so it's a fact. It's not really transferable. And all those other things we can transfer from one context to the other. And so that's why we're going to be focusing so much on concepts as Chris and I work through this with you. Just to review what a concept is, it is just that, an organizing idea. If you can imagine the idea of a file folder on your desktop, that you'll different things in it that have something in common. And that's really what a concept is. Whatever you label your file folder as, that would be a concept name. So for example, a car is a concept. You imagine it being a file folder. Everything related to car, pictures of something would be put into that folder. Or truck would be another. Sometimes we come across information and things in our world that don't fit the folder, so we create a new folder. So you can see in the middle, there's something that might be a combination between a car or a truck. And that's because concepts have distinctive attributes. There's something about a car that makes it a car. It's got certain characteristics. And those are different than what makes a truck a truck. And so because of those distinctive attributes, we can create those folders. And then we have all kinds of examples of those concepts along the way. Just to deepen our understanding of concepts a little bit more, one thing to keep in mind, and you're probably aware of, that concepts do range from specific. So using some concepts from this organizing idea, we know that concept is a change is a concept that we can see in many disciplines. Social studies, we could probably see it we can see it in language arts, music, phys ed, everything. But when we get narrower, more specific with the concepts, become more specific. So we can look at the environmental change, which is something more specific than change. And then we could take a closer look at one type of environmental change, and that might be erosion. And there are all different types of erosion and different examples of erosion we could find as well. When it comes to concepts, the more specific concepts, the deeper you go into the student learning, and probably the more richer they become with their knowledge and understanding of that particular subject or discipline. All concepts have definitions. Quite often you'll find those in the knowledge section. And you've probably noticed that as you're going through your other curricula as well that you're implementing this year. So sometimes there's there, other times there isn't, and it shows up along the way. In this case, responsibility. There's no real definition there, but you could see it's in one of the understandings, and it shows up a little later on, but it's never really defined. So sometimes when you see those, you'll want to probably make sure that students understand what they are and develop those concepts with them. And you can Google and whatnot to gather, use all the different dictionaries on Google to get a definition that I think best fits the situation that I'm in with the kids. Besides that, concepts have examples, and in this particular case, there are examples of animals that migrate. And once again, there's that word include. So we would want to include those things because it's not a such as. So we want to investigate all those animals that migrate. And those are examples of that. And there are no examples of responsibility. So we may have to create examples for students to work with. That concepts are transferable. And the picture that I had of those two different perspectives of those buildings, that's an example of concepts transferring from one context to another. Another example is here. We could probably see change in photo number 1 on the left with a storm coming in. And you could probably see change next picture. So a change in weather in this particular case, and a change in technology. That's good, Chris, keep going. Not only are concepts transferable, but they can help us provide a focus. So here we have an image, and you could see a lot of things, but if I asked you to focus in on that image using the conceptual landforms, you would see focusing on the certain things, the flatness of the foreground and the plains area on the hilly background. If I asked you to use the conceptual lens of lifestyle, you would probably think of agrarian or pastoral lifestyles when you look at this photo. So by providing a conceptual lens, we can focus in and deeply. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at the curriculum through the lens of the concept itself. We know what a concept is. So if we take a look at the learning outcome and the cusps through that lens, we want to see where those particular concepts are. Go to the next slide, Chris. Here's a snippet of the grade 1 curriculum with the guiding questions, the learning outcomes, and some associated cusps. So if you take a look at that carefully, you'll probably start, and if you look at it through the lens of concepts, you'll probably see the concepts start jumping out at you, and they're the purple ones there, environment change and so on. I did in this particular case, because hibernation is I think it's a pretty specific thing. Hibernation kind of means one thing, whereas migration can mean many things. I mean, migration of people, it doesn't have to be seasonal. Migration could be a lot of things. So if we're talking about animal migration, that might be more specific, but it is a concept that is used, and you'll find migration in many different disciplines. There are some hidden ones there, and they become important as well. They're the ones that are tucked in with the verb. So if we take a look at the next slide, we'll see some of the verbs in the curriculum here, and they're highlighted in yellow in brackets. So if we take a look at skills and procedures, for example, investigate is the verb, but what do we do when we investigate? We conduct an investigation. And so to know what investigation is would be helpful in determining the steps and procedures when we investigate. So you can see that there are a lot of concepts within there, and some are more important than others. And this is only a snippet of the curriculum. So just keep in mind that you want to take, when you're looking at all the concepts in the curriculum, you want to focus on those key ones, those big ones that Chris talked about as the big rocks. And those are what I label as the anchor concepts. And in this particular grade, you'll see there's some environment. You'll know seasonal change does, sudden changes there, responsibility, decisions, behavior. Behavior not only of humans, but behavior of animals as well. Next slide, please. I should remind you, I'm going to go really fast here because Chris does have some wonderful resources, and I don't want to take too much of that time. So if I'm going too fast, and I'm going a few hundred miles an hour here, please stop or tell me to repeat something, and I'd be glad to do that. Another thing to know about concepts is they can easily be related to other concepts, and they can be related in more than one way. What I've done is I've taken all the concepts that I could find in Earth systems, and some specific things, they may not be necessarily concepts, such as hibernation you'll find on there. But at the end of the day, well, you can put them all together and create some new kind of meaning. If you ever want to use this and find this helpful, please you'll have this downloaded and available to you in the grade 1 folder later on. But it might help to give a good picture of where you are in the course, and maybe you could share with the kids and see if they could put some of it together. So you'll just read it by following the arrows. For example, environments go through changes, and we call that environmental change. Some of the changes can be sudden, such as storms or fires, and some of the changes can be slow, such as a seasonal change. And of course, you can see it as you go along. You notice on the left-hand side, the two different colors there, the arrows are pointing the option because they're really beginning with the concept senses, and our senses can be used to help observe and understand the environment. And same with responsibility. Responsibility helps promote care towards the environment. So you'll have that available to you if you find that helpful. By all means, go to it. Next slide, Chris. We're also going to now next take a look at the conceptual lens of understandings, and that's that middle part. So if we could take a look, thanks. This next slide. I'm just going to ask you to keep in mind, take a look at those two concepts that I have down there, and that's seasonal change environment. And I think I might have changed this a little bit on the next slide. We'll see if I was to ask you to take those two ideas and describe some kind of a relationship or state them in a relationship, what might you come up with? What is the connection between environment and seasonal change? There are many connections you could probably make, but Chris, I'm gonna have you go to the next slide. And there's the change I made. I changed it to environmental appearance, not just environment, a little bit more specific, because throughout the curriculum guide, or throughout this particular organizing idea, on referring to appearance of the environment and these appearance of the environment. And it is a concept, it really is the environmental appearance, what the environment looks like. So I'm going to be using that. If we were to put those two ideas or concepts in some kind of a relationship, we might get the notion, or we might come up with the idea an environment adapts to seasonal changes, or seasonal changes are related to the appearance of the environment, or seasonal changes are related to environmental appearance. The reason I'm putting those up there is because we know there are many ways you can probably organize. So what the authors of the curriculum are focusing on is that middle one. So you go ahead, Chris, and go to the next slide. That seasonal changes are related to the appearance of the environment. So taking a close look at understanding then, what they really are composed of are the individual concepts that are on in unison, in relationship with each other. And as soon as we make a statement that has a relationship between two concepts, that's where we get to the understanding. And it's deeper than just knowledge, okay? We can tell students can memorize that seasonal change, but that still becomes knowledge. It becomes understanding when they can demonstrate that and show you that. And that's where the understanding comes into play, and is really, although it may seem like a fairly straightforward part, sometimes I think we forget about it and ask students to demonstrate their understanding. Next slide, please, Chris. So concepts do create understandings, and those understandings can be transferred as well because they're composed of two or more concepts. So if we take a look at the two images, there are some questions. Is this an example of our understanding that seasonal changes are related to the appearance of an environment? Explain why you think so. And so what we would want kids to do is to say, well, yes, that's a picture of summer. I can tell by the appearance of the things in there. I see things blossoming, things are green. And the other one, the appearance of the environment relates that season to winter. And I could tell by the ice and the lack of leaves and so on. So the appearance can be related to the seasonal change by what we see. And we could do that to many different environments that we come across transferable. So just as a brief summary of everything I covered, the concepts have definitions, examples, they are transferable, they can provide a focus, and concepts can be related to each other. And when we do that and we create a relationship, we create an understanding, and that also be transferred to different situations. One more conceptual lens, and that's the lens of those skills and procedures, which are the doing verbs. And Chris, I hope I put a link in there. I can't remember if I did. We'll find out. Let's go to the next slide.
Here.
But here's some tips. First of all, I do see it we'll wait for a second. Just when you're looking at the skills and procedures and you want to isolate them, first use your conceptual lens of the verbs to just pull it out. Isolate that skill, and then separate the content. And you can see I've done that with one of the statements, which was relate changes in the appearance of plants and animals. The specific skill itself is actually relate, I think. We'll get to number two. And then you have the content part. So when you read it, though, take a look carefully and ask yourself, what does the statement really asking you? And not just for this particular unit, but in other units that you may be coming across, because it's clear. Is it really asking them to relate, make a connection that, okay, and if I see a hare and it's white, I know it's winter, but is that actually knowing something and just saying that they know that animals some animals turn white in winter? So it's really hard to know if it's just a knowledge piece or if they're asking us to classify and so on. At the end of the day, we're asking kind of kids to match changes to a season at the end of the day. So sometimes these skills can be kind of tricky. If you go to the link, Chris, there's a list of all the skills procedures from this particular cusp. Yeah. Oh, I guess there. Boy, oh
Yeah.
boy.
It's not linked, sorry.
Okay. I'm going to go through it. I'll go past it, I guess. But you'll see a slide that separates them all and then gives you a list of all the specific skills and concepts that can be that are concepts, but excuse me, the skills that we may want to address. My third point on that slide was, what you'll probably want to do is, after you isolate them, make sure that you have a chance for kids to practice those. You'll find things like investigate, which I'll talk about shortly. Things like discuss shows up quite a bit. What does it mean to discuss? And stop and teach students how to discuss without using necessarily the content of the course. So the reason I'll share that list with you is to separate them out and give students opportunities to work with those skills so they can become good at them and apply it to the content. You'll know that you're going to be able to focus on the content and not the skill because they'll already have mastery over that. Next slide, please, Chris. So at the end of the day, we've got understandings and skills and procedures and individual concepts. And they in order to get to the transfer phase, we can have kids take what they've learned in our classrooms and our context of our courses and apply them to new situations. We need to go through a bit of a process. You may be familiar with Hattie Fisher's and Fry's surface, deep, and transfer. At this surface area, this is where we often focus our energies, which is good. We need a strong surface understanding. And that's where kids get a really deep understanding of the concept, the individual concepts, and they become really solid at the individual skills. We don't connect anything together yet. That's when the component happens. So we start making those connections between different concepts, such as seasonal changes, create different appearances in the environment. That's when we start getting to the deep zone. And we want to make sure that they understand those connections in the understandings. And if we do that, and they can demonstrate, now we're hitting at the deep spot. And then to get to the transfer part, then what we do is just give them totally different contexts and have them work more independently at demonstrating their understanding with those things. If it's a skill of investigating, we teach them how to investigate at the surface and go through practices. In the deep level, we talk about their investigation, how's it going, how's it working. And at the transfer, then we want them to investigate something totally independently. And I'll give you an example of that shortly. Next slide, please, Chris. I have a graphic to go along with that a little bit. Quite often people think at the surface level, kids run the ideas of concepts. For example, the definition of seasonal change or the definition of an environment, that's enough. No, we want people to be able to find examples of seasonal change. We want students to find examples of a conclusion. We want students to find examples of these things in different contexts. And that's why I have the box that's just flat with concept 3D. So the concept itself flat in that graphic is just the definition, but being able to find examples of it in the real world, we know that we know they've got a really good solid understanding of that concept. Facts don't transfer it, they'll memorize and they stay there. We can't move them along through deep surface and learn at once. So things like dates of when things happen and so on, those aren't transferable. When we get to the deep, then what we've got then is those relationships. So we can show that graphic shows 2 or more concepts and relationships, and the different background represents different concepts, the context, excuse me. Maybe you ask them that for the understanding question that I had with seasonal change and appearance of the environment. Using those 2 concepts, I might have a winter picture, that would be the orange, and I might have a summer picture, that would be the pink, or maybe we'll go outside and talk about an environment outside. And so the context always changes, but asking them to demonstrate their understanding. Transfer, then we move until more independence and more distant kind of context for them. And so those are the 2 things that move to transfer. So there is no real definitive line between deep and transfer, because you can see that we're using different contexts to teach them those skills. The difference is time along the way so that they can consolidate their understandings and then begin applying them to other contexts as they come across it, not only in the context of what they learn in school, but the context of their own life when they're out in the community or out in their own environment. Next slide, please. I'll go through this really quick. Another graphic that kind of shows what I'm talking about. So at the surface level, we're going to really work hard to take those particular concepts out there that are in there. And then in the surface area, you're going to really hammer what an investigation is. And I have some examples for you. I won't go through it, but you'll have that available to you. And we'll make sure they understand what investigation is. Then I have them investigate animal behavior throughout the seasons. Then they can apply it to their understanding that show me that seasonal changes affect animals' behavior through an investigation. And then if they can say that, yes, it does, I've done this investigation, and here's how it shows that behaviors with seasonal changes, now you know we've got the deep understanding. So it's not so much just to do the investigation, but it's also time for them to demonstrate their state their understanding. Next slide, please, Chris. There are lots of different instructional approaches you could use to develop skills and so on. I have a couple there for you. You don't have to go through them, Chris, but I'm just going to talk about them. You'll notice at the bottom there's this direct teaching of skills strategy. One of the skills and procedures in this organizing idea does ask kids to investigate, and is actually in the scientific methods organizing idea in grade 1. There's 4 steps to it. And if you click on that, it'll take you and your students through a 4-step process of how to conduct an investigation and what that really means. Now, when you're doing a skills teaching strategy, you kind of lay out the steps. This step 2, you do this, step 3, you do this. And you're planning when you lay out the steps, you may find that you're going to include a concept in the steps that you want to make sure students understand. So the first step, for example, in investigating in grade 1 is that students make a prediction. So we have to understand what, and the last step is that they make a conclusion based on the information. So we need to help kids understand what a conclusion is before we get them to do full-on investigations and predictions as well. So there's some concept attainment activities that are examples of how you can do that with those 2 concepts, and then a skill strategy for investigating. Next slide. Deep. The intent of the deep, again, is to create and communicate those connections between the concepts. There's basically 3 parts to that, not always, but sometimes, and that's to use the skill procedure in conjunction with the concepts, right? So it's comparing, it's investigating, it's doing something. Step 2, when that activity is done, you want to ask them to explain their understanding. What does it show you? What does it say? Quite often we give them a task, we have them compare and contrast something, and they tell us that things are different, and we leave it at that. What we need to do is take it that step further to deepen it and say, well, what does that tell us about something? And then step 3 is just give more activity for context to practice those skills and those understandings. Next slide. There are all kinds of different activities there. I think it's really, if you can and your kids are able, begin concept mapping in grade 1. I have an example you can see a little bit later. It's really useful thing. And if kids can take those individual concepts and put them together and they can tell you why they're connected, you know you're at deep. If they're having trouble, you got to keep learning and practicing some more and do some more teaching. But they can put all the ideas together in a connection that makes sense. We know they understand, because they wouldn't be able to do that without a full understanding. Use case studies, use conceptual questions, use all kinds of things. I highlighted the things that are probably going to be most useful at grade 1. There are some examples that you'll find throughout Chris's presentation, and I've got a couple examples following right away here, Chris. So I'm going to quickly have you go through those slides, because I'm going to try to stop in 3 minutes. Conceptual questions are ones like, I'm going to have you move on. It's really asking questions. How is this concept connected? How is this and this related? Kids in grade 1 are going to have a tough time to that. So what we're going to do is try to put prompts with them. And if you can go on to the next slide, Chris. I'm not going to have you go on to the slide after that. One more slide. Sorry. So here's a task, for example. If we ask them, we'll relate this image to a season, that's one of the skills and processes. So they're the skills relating it, relating what they see to a season. Same with that one. So we can have that they see that make one a winter scene or season and one a summer season. But that's not quite good enough. We can go to the next slide, Chris. After they do that, then we'll want to ask this question, well, how are seasonal changes and an appearance of environment connected? We can then ask them conceptual questions and maybe doing prompts. Here's how we can do that. Ask them to choose one statement and explain why you disagree. One of the things increases the other things in terms of seasonal change and appearance of the environment. One thing increases the other, changes the other, weakens the other. Which do they think it is and why? And if they can do that, they're next slide, please. I see my internet's unstable. Sorry, you're probably getting a wobbly voice.
Yeah.
And there's another example. So there's lots of examples there. Next slide. Again, there's put things in concept maps. If you can get kids to do that, put that together and explain it, you know that they've got a really good understanding of those things. They can put them in relationship with each other and explain it to you. Next slide. And transfer just really means, at the end of the day, more independence with demonstrating their understanding. And so go outside and do things with students, videos, give them all different things to practice and identify concepts in, or their understandings with, or their skills with. If you want to do a deep transfer thing and have a larger activity at the end of the day, you could do case studies or guided inquiry, everything together in the organizing idea that you've done with. Those kinds of things those particular instructional approaches are really good at the transfer end of things. You want to make sure that kids do have a surface and deep level of those things before you get into things like project-based learning, though. Next slide. I gotta stop. It's really quick thing on assessment. That we do need to assess along the way, even though we don't report at the cusp level, we do need to assess, because we have to know where their kids are ready to move from surface to deep to transfer. And at the surface level, we certainly want to do some pre-assessment to make sure that they don't already know. We can just move on and to start working at the deep. So that does still have to happen. And what does assessment look like for each of those? The next slide gives a little bit of an example. You can go to the next slide, Chris. If you're preparing assessments, then what you want to do is make sure that your assessment will give you this kind of information. This level, for example, can students state the definition or meaning of the concepts? We know that's not good enough. Can the students distinguish examples and non-examples, or generate examples not of their own? So those are all things that will be helpful at the surface level, deep level, and transfer level when you're trying to generate some assessments for this organizer. And finally, the next slide, I think that might be it. Just wanted to say that the reason it's really important to be intentional with what we do as we move through these different stages of learning. Know where your kids are at, what stage they're at, and then intentionally choose resources, intentionally choose assessments that are going to be helpful at that stage. I should add that those formative assessments, all the learning activities they do, watch the kids when they do those things. They become such valuable information when they're making a concept map, for example, or when they're doing investigation, to watch and hear what they're saying and use that triangulation to get all that, decide whether they're ready to move on from one level to the next. Be intentional with the instructional approach, assessment, and be intentional with the resource. Look at a resource you may find, whether it's an online lesson plan that you think is great, or an online activity or something. Look at through the lens of stage of learning, see where is that activity best going to fit. The assessment, and don't just take it and use it because it fits sort of the theme of the unit. Be intentional with what we do, and I think that'll help kids move from that surface learning to deep to transfer, which is really, if we think that's our collective goal, then we're all doing that. We're going to help kids move to that of what we want them to know and learn and do, or know and do. I'm looking at the time, Chris, I'm sorry, I went a little bit overboard.
We're all good, all good. So all the things that Ted has just talked about are really, really critical for this piece that I'm about to sort of unpack with you as well, because it isn't just about getting a resource link and then grabbing a worksheet. That worksheet's got to be connected to one of the concepts that you've identified as being the one that you're going to work through with the students. So that is really the upfront work. Everything that he's just covered is really the upfront work that you need to know before you kind of launch into that planning piece. Because again, we always say you need to know, first of all, what it is you're going to teach and how are you assessing it before you start planning your lessons. So that hasn't really ever changed. So the one thing I do want to point out is whatever I share with you today, we have to also remember, and again, for those who are new, that this is no longer a topic course. We're not teaching a boxed in one topic that's specific to your grade. This is an ongoing learning. And so that means that there's bridging that has to exist this year in the pilot series for the science. Because you may have students that have arrived at your grade 1 door this year that did not get, obviously, the kindergarten experience in the new science program. So they're not landed at your doorstep with that background knowledge. And that is still going to be rather critical. We do need to be aware of that and that we need to take that into account. So whenever I put the resources together for you, I also build that part in. Because if there are something from, or if there's something from the previous grade that you need them to know, I've embedded that, or we've reviewed it, or we're going to talk about it. So in kindergarten, we talked about I notice, I wonder. That's kind of a typical approach that a lot of teachers use in primary, where you see something. What do you see? What are the things that you're observing? And then what are your questions about that? What don't you understand? What would you like to know? You know, why is there an animal standing there? Whatever their question is. And then just putting those on the board and unpacking those as you're teaching the unit has kind of been a standard practice. So with the grade 1s, I've kind of elaborated a little bit differently. Is I notice change. I'm seeing change because we're really focusing a lot on the seasons in the environment. How are those two connected? And that's the question that Ted asked you, and that's really the sort of the central global focus that I took as well. And that is, how do I see change around me? Now, you need to remember that this is something that they're going to come to you with, should have come to you with some pre-knowledge already. So one of them is the senses, and we did senses in other organizing ideas already. But it's critical that they understand the role that their senses play in identifying those seasons. And when I give you an explanation, I ask you why. Tell me why you know that spring. Why do you know that summer? They might refer to their senses, or they should involve their senses in their explanation. Well, that happened in grade 1. So again, we have reviewed that with with kindergarten. That happened there. So we've also reviewed that with you in grade 1, because if you haven't done senses, if this is your first unit that you've unpacked, then this isn't going to be review for you. This is day one for you. So we did a number of different things with senses and matter, and I gave them card sorts there. I've done the same thing here, but I gave you new things so that, again, in review, the kids aren't seeing the same thing over and over. So we're going to do a little bit of a review on senses, and then sort of answering that question that was asked in kindergarten: can all environments be expressed using our senses? So again, the terminology of environment, they nailed that in kindergarten. So if they arrived this year at your doorstep, I might not know what environment is, right? So I need to keep that bridging piece in your planning, because it isn't necessarily in this first year going to be there. What are seasons? What are they? And how do they influence the elements and inhabitants of our environment, whether it's people, animals, plants, whatever? How do seasonal changes influence animal and behavioral, right? So those are the key words, those anchor ones that Ted was talking about. How can senses help make informed decisions? How do I get influenced by the seasons? What do I do when it's raining outside? How do I react? I might not go outside. I might put on a raincoat. I might dress differently, as opposed to when it's 85 degrees outside or it's 32 degrees outside, like whatever, right? I mean, those are the things that we want students to be able to realize, that there are personal changes that are going to happen. And how did seasonal changes affect First Nations in Inuit ways of life? What is their response to it, and how has it been in history? How did that influence where they set up their camps or their communities? Why did they even move? What was the driving factor? Was it the weather that was the driving factor? Was it food that was a factor? Was it both? So did seasonal migration of animals affect how First Nations peoples looked at where they would set up camp? And yes, it did. So what are possible sudden changes that can occur in my environment? This one I didn't spend a ton of time on. We did weather, a discussion of weather in kindergarten. And I think even within that conversation, the word tornado comes in. So I think we can cover some of those pieces very generally in review. I don't know that that's the biggest rock in all of this particular one, but clearly weather changes that are severe can impact my environment. If I have a severe thunderstorm, which is referenced in the kindergarten stuff that I shared with you, then obviously I'm not going to be outside. If I'm riding my horse, I'm not going to be on the horse if there's lightning. Like, those are the kinds of things that definitely would be more impactful for our students at the ages and where they live. So to start this unit off, one of the things that I would suggest is really upfront is just reviewing senses. Do they even know the 5 senses? Maybe they've remembered it. Typically, we've done this sort of in grade 1. So this has kind of been a science grade 1 piece that we would have done anyway. They also would have done some of that in kindergarten. So again, I'm suggesting that you start it off so that they have that background knowledge and can use that in their explanations and their descriptions that they give you. And you would expect to hear that, so you would want to prompt those questions as well. So I won't go through all of the links, but when you click this on, there is a card sort. These are the 5 senses, the cards that you will see in there, and that they can use to take the remaining cards and put them on top of wherever they think they should be. And they could do that with a partner. And then you might even want to ask them, to do a gallery walk in grade 1 and just see, did everybody put their cards in the same place? Because many of the cards could be put in multiple places. And that's a question, that we could ask them. The other thing that in grade 1 you're going to want to consider is also reviewing environment, because this is where it started, was in kindergarten. The definition of an environment. What is an environment? What does it include? What are the man-made and what are the natural components of an environment? That's kindergarten. So again, there's a little bit of background knowledge here that needs to be resurfaced before you can kind of just launch into how do seasons involve or it can change my environment. I need to have a good solid definition and understanding of what an environment is. So again, this is one that I would suggest that you might want to work on. I'm giving you an activity. We did a case study in kindergarten, and you could go back and grab those. There were 3 unique pictures. But again, remember that a skill has to be taught first. I need to show somebody what a skill is before I can just assume they're going to be able to embed it themselves in grade 1, kindergarten, whatever grade. So in this particular case with the 3 different pictures, the first one was the case study of what do I see and wonder in this picture. And they would do that as a partner, but we would unpack it as a class. So we've already asked them, what do you think environment means? Have you ever heard of the word, what it means? You could write things on the board. You could start a list. It's not important for you to give them a definition of what environment is. It's more important for them to generate their thinking and then create using kind of those prompts and stems that Ted was showing you. Can you create a definition with the students based on the words that they've given you? So in here, we're asking them to, what do you notice? What do you see? What do you observe? I see some live animals. I see some greens. I see some flowers. I see some bales. I see some houses. And for some kids, this is foreign. They've never seen a farm before. For some of you, you live in a farming community. This is second nature. So again, is what do they see? You want to put all those up there because you're going to want to have that conversation about which are naturals and which are man-mades. And then what do you wonder? Are there any questions that you have about this picture? Now, if you wanted to really solidify the environment, you might want to go back to kindergarten and grab the other 2 pictures because we didn't do those as a class. We suggested they do those as a partner. And it's a follow through, but again, the pictures have way more man-made things in them in some cases, or way more natural things in some cases. So there's also a resource, and I'm going to take you there right away, but one of the resources that I suggest that you use would be the Learning Circle. Now, you may already have this. It's a free resource, and I'll show you where to download it. I also put it into the file folder that you will be shared out so that you can grab it from there as well. But in this one is also a section called the seasons. And you could start your entire unit with reading that section. And that section will actually unpack every cusp, actually, that is in this particular learner outcome. It will talk about how some different seasons I wear different clothing. Sometimes I eat different foods because it's hot or it's cold. But it also unpacks the First Nations perspective of each of the seasons. What is spring? Spring is the time of new birth, which we often talk about plants. But it's how it's described then from an Indigenous lens. How is summer described from an Indigenous lens? So you could start with that story and use that as your umbrella to unpack your entire unit. Or if you're going to kind of do it a little bit differently, I'm going to focus on seasons. You might want to put that at the end before you start putting together some of the components where the students are going to be working on their own project. So I'm just saying that up front because I think it's important to kind of be aware that it's there and it could be done in 2 different ways. So this comes from the Office of the Treaty Commissioner. If you've never been here before, I would suggest that you go in and sign up for a free link to this. I'm going to put this in the chat box. I'm just going to go into it and show it to you right now. If you can just stay with me for now. And then you can go in and sign up if you haven't already done so. I just want to show you just the quick pieces that you should be aware of. And then you can go in at any time. There's lots of freebies on here. And then there's lots of places where you have to purchase. Okay, what's wrong with our chat box here? Come on. Okay, our chat box is, there we go. All right. So it's in the just go into the chat box and grab that link. And I always go straight to the education site. If you just go to otc.ca, it'll come to a general site, but just go to education. And when I'm, as a teacher, wanting to look at materials, I'm going to go to the K-12 educational materials. So just jot that down just as a quick reminder for yourself. It'll ask you to log in as a teacher. So I'll log in and just get us through that right away. And then there's a couple of places. It'll take you straight to this one called resources. And resources, if you are part of a school board that built the First Nations kits with me years ago, or almost 5 years ago now, you already have huge binders in each of the grades, right from kindergarten up through to grade 12. There's a binder, it has this look to it. These are addendums to that. And so they give you good concept-based questions, open-ended views, and they're free. So I would go in, find the one for your grade and download it, and it fits to the binder that's in there. If you're not part of that and you wanted to buy the binder, you could certainly do that, but they're not cheap. They're $93. So this is a good start. And if you ever have this and you're not really sure how to get going in it, just send me an email and I can get on with you really quickly and step you through that. But there's so many free downloads in here that you can have access to. And again, if you haven't got really a tool base in your school yet of Indigenous resources, this would be a good place for you to come and get them, right? So there's lots of things here. There's the treaties are all in here as well. I'm going to go over to classrooms under the resources. And you have to be logged in as a teacher to get into this one. Now I'm going to find some have a cost to them. Now, again, some of these are already in the kits if you have the kits. So if you haven't looked at your kits for a long time or you're not sure and you're new to your school, maybe find out. If nobody in your school knows what you're talking about, send me an email and I can tell you whether you belong to a school division that has it. That's the easiest way because the province links through me anyway with those. So in these particular resources, you've got lots again that you can still go in and you can download. So here are those learning circles. And if you've never seen these before, go in, just add it to the cart. It'll say $0. And then when you go to checkout, you just download it. It'll send you the download. But there's one for 4 to 7, then there's one for 8 to 11, there's one for 12 to 16. So they are increasingly more difficult and more timely and very related to the materials that the students would be at the different levels and ages. So it's a really, really good resource. And I will also point out, and I forgot to point it out yesterday, when you go into videos, a lot of times people email me and say, I don't know enough about First Nations, like I need to learn myself. These videos are amazing. And so if you just personally want to learn a little bit more about history and learn about different components of it, then for sure you want to go here. And there are definitely some that I would highly recommend over others. So if you're looking for background knowledge and you're not sure which ones to go to and you don't want to go through them all, send me an email and I'll just tell you which titles to go through. Okay, let's go back to where we were. So again, we want to talk with seasons, and I'm sort of big on not stand up and deliver, tell people what things are. I like students, whether they're young or old, it doesn't really matter to me. I like them to experience some other people's presentations. And then I want them to debrief with me after. What did we hear? What did you see? What did you learn? What were the words that you heard? So that we can start, just like we were building a definition of an environment, what are the things that you learned about seasons? So I've given you a couple here. There's the seasons on Earth, and they do talk a little bit about night and day as well and how weather affects it. And then we have the Sesame Street ones. They're both really good. And I put a little note under here, includes what clothes to wear in each of the seasons. So again, depending on how you're going to unpack the topics that you're seeing there, then you might not want to show both of them at the same time. You might want to do one day and unpack the meaning, the words, do they remember what the names of the seasons are? And then use the next one as your review when they come back next day as your kickoff to say, let's review what we learned about seasons yesterday and let's just do it through a different one, right? So it just gives them those opportunities to have that connection.
Today, we will learn about seasons.
Okay. And then I think once they've gotten to a point where they understand that there are 4 seasons, that there are some differences between them, then maybe we show them a picture. And we could say to them, could you name the seasons just by looking at the pictures? And that's one of the items that's in your curriculum document is, can they make observations of different scenarios of seasons and can they identify them from those pictures? So here I need to be able to observe and I need to use my senses of sight and I need to make some determinations about which one of these is being represented. And the same thing in the next one. You know, can I make a decision and can I name which of the seasons belong to each of those pictures? So again, it's just taking it one step further so that they're now having to really make connections between what they've learned about the changes in the environment that they're seeing and what does that look like in reflection to the identification of a season. One of the other outcomes and understandings is to look at seasons over time. So look at a specific environment, and can you unpack that environment as it explores and goes through the different seasons? So that's actually one of the activities, or one of the sort of big encompassing learning activities that I would like the students to do. So it would be something that would be a year-long revisiting consistently and continuously, which works very well with grade 1 because you have cycles that you have to address in time. And time in math talks about cycles and seasons. So as we keep revisiting calendar, as we keep revisiting cycle notions, as we keep revisiting that in math, we keep bringing in the science at the same time because there's a very tight connection at that point. So what I did is I went through to find what are some time lapse that you could show students how things happen over time, because obviously I can't see a whole year right off the bat, but I do want them to experience that before we actually ask them to engage in it. So you'll see by the descriptions underneath kind of what you're looking at and which one you might want to use. Maybe you want to use 2 of them. So here you just have the different seasonal transitions through time-lapse photography. And it's just basically that picture that we showed them before, just watching it as it happens, right? Here I have one that's filmed every day for a year. So they see the same picture just over and over. It's being refilmed as the year goes on through time-lapse photography. So they're seeing the leaves fall, they're seeing the colors change, they're seeing new life come, they're seeing green come. So again, that gives them a notion of there's their model. That's the teaching of the representation of what they're going to do in whatever environment they're going to select. We want them to pick their environment, not assign it to them. So again, here's a tree, it goes through the changes. Here's a year in 40 seconds. So those are simply for you to use at the places or revisiting them if you're ready to with each of the students. So
Chris,
here
I have
is,
a question.
yes, absolutely, Kat.
Sorry for interrupting.
No, not at all.
So one of my students has never seen snow before now.
Okay.
So he's not familiar with the seasons the way that we know them. Would it be appropriate for me to, like, he comes from the southern states, and before that he was actually in the Philippines. So he's never seen snow until he moved here this year. So would it be appropriate to do a comparison between what he's familiar with and what we have?
Absolutely. And I think it would be great for him to still experience and do the 4 seasons. But I think the power that you have with his experience is that you also notice in your curriculum, it talks about some locations do not experience 4 seasons. There just isn't that kind of a weather change where they see 4 seasons. He would come from one of those. So then that would be a good way to have that conversation, and say he comes from, and this is what he experienced, but he was missing that 4th one. He was missing what we know is snow. So yeah, you could use that as to meet your outcome for the ones who don't have 4 seasons, and then introducing him to the 4 so that he's familiar with them. So yeah, you got a great situation happening there. That's actually a benefit for sure. And I think a lot of our immigrant students right now that are coming over from other countries are going to be in those situations, especially your Filipino children. They often will come over, and I know that when they've come to my school, they've often said, it is so cold. It is so cold and all this white stuff, because they're not used to seeing that. So same for them, right? It's a season they're not familiar with.
Okay, thank you.
So in this blank space here, let me just be clear on what's happening here. I did create a foldable for you, and a foldable is just a graphic organizer. I'm just going to hold it up here so that you can see it. It focuses on the seasons, but because the activity that I'd like the students to do is to focus on one environment throughout the entire year, then what I'd like them to do is pick an environment, pick a place that they can look at and maybe not a parking lot would be my first choice. We want them to have something where they can look at animals and that they can see some changes in grass and leaves and those types of things. But where that is should be their choice. It could be in their backyard, it could be on a farm, it could be, I ski, I go to the mountains all the time, so I could see the same location 4 times a year, right? They can use whatever they want to use. It's an all-encompassing, they would do their entire year's work right in here. On the back of it, I put a pocket, so if you have them collect materials, they can just slide these in there. And these fit right into one pocket holder. So it just fits into a binder, the whole thing sits there and it's ready to go. I will show you in this. I'm not sure why it's not uploading right now, but for some reason we're stalled on the upload. So I have different slides that will show you how to put it together. It's very simple. I've already scanned the foldable in. It's in your file folder, so you can just photocopy it, get it ready to go. And then they would be able to use that to record their materials and however they're going to do it. So entitling it's kind of something like my own environmental changes. I want to represent my environment and I want to show you the changes that happen in that environment that I've chosen over a year or over time. So it would be something that we would want to start right at the beginning of the year. It doesn't mean you have to do Earth systems right off the bat, but you might want to talk about seasons. What season am I in? I'm talking about calendar. We're just finishing summer, yada, 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 right? So here I have find an environment that you can watch all year and take a picture of it using that same place and position. And then can you identify each of the seasons just by looking at the pictures that you're taking? Can you explain why you're calling this the season of fall or this is the season of winter? What are the pieces that you're going to use as your descriptors? Are there senses that you would be using that would help to verify what you're thinking? For example, I feel temperature changes, right? That's a sensation that I can feel. So that's part of my description. We'd also maybe want to have them research some of the animals that are in that environment of theirs. And they may have chosen one that doesn't have a lot of big animals or animals that experience migration or experience hibernation. That doesn't mean we couldn't actually ask them to do a little bit of a research. Migration will be the easier one because most students in Alberta see things flying south and see them coming back. We see animals and plants that just disappear over the winter. So those ones are a little bit easier for us to see when we talk about. But the link that you're seeing here is a link to a YouTube on what is migration. And it shows some animals flying. It shows plants changing. It shows as we are migrating to a different season, what are the changes that happen? So it's migration in a big version. I've also given you a link here on animals. If they don't know what kinds of animals kind of exist in Alberta, there's just a list. I would encourage you to add on to them, but maybe they're looking to explain some animals and changes in animals. Maybe they don't even know what animals are around. So then they could pick a couple. And then down here, I've given you an activity. It's called Migration Challenge. And they just need a balloon. And it just shows them what does it mean to migrate? What does it mean for animals when they leave? So when Canada geese, for example, fly, what does that mean? And they simply form a line in the classroom and they have to keep this balloon off the floor, moving it forward as a migrating balloon moving out of the room. So it just gives them a little bit of fun activities to figure out what migration is all about. So that hands-on learning. On the other side of it, we have hibernation, and not every animal hibernates, but we have animals that sit in lots of places. I live in a city. We got gophers. Gophers migrate or hibernate. So there are animals that hibernate. If they've never heard that, maybe they want to do a little bit of research, and they're not too young for that. You could have some books in the classrooms of some bears and maybe some gophers and maybe butterflies. Butterflies migrate. Like, what are some animals in your location that they could just look at some books in your libraries that you have in the classroom that would give them some information about that animal and the hibernation. Again, this is linked though for you to a video, and this is linked to the same animals. So it just gives them a little bit of information. Bears are always the big one that kids think about for hibernation, and bears are always a big interest for kids. So this video that you're looking at the bottom is about bears and hibernation. And it's one that I've used before with students, and they love it because it's the actual bears in their den. They get to see them breathing and blah, blah, blah. So I think that would be one that you might want to just show them, even if they don't live in a bear world, that's fine. It just gives them that opportunity. In the center of the foldable, when we look at this sheet that I've got here for you, and I know this isn't the ideal way of doing it, you see a circle in the middle, and the circle is about them. I want them to also reflect how do they make changes for each of the seasons. So that circle touches all 4 of the seasons, and we're going to ask them to reflect as they unpack their environment. How are they changing? What are they doing? Winter, we use boots, we use mitts, those types of things. Oops. And so again, depending on where you unpack that seasons document that I showed you at the beginning, this might be where you might want to talk about how do we integrate the Indigenous culture into the talk of seasons. So if you did it up front, that's great, because they can add that into their foldable as they go. If you're going to do it here, then that's another place that they can add it in. When we look at some of the pieces when it comes to Indigenous culture, we want to make sure that we have some resources that we can look at as well. I have some additional resources for you that you might want to consider. People are always asking for, what can I do to add into our school library? This first one is from kindergarten. This is that bridging one. This talks about weather. So if they don't have the language of weather yet, when you talk about big drastic changes like a tornado, I don't maybe have even the language yet of windy, cloudy, all of those. This got covered in kindergarten. So again, I'm giving these to you just to bridge gaps if you need them. If you don't need them, then you can just ignore that whole resource page. If you are looking for additional, for yourself more so, not directly for the students in this one, information about land and understanding about the connection to land, including weather, including water in particular, then I've given you 2 more, people of the land and honoring the land. That would give you some background knowledge again that you would be able to use in grade 1, but I would not show these videos to the students. We did not do the 4 R's again in this unit with the kindergartens because it's already been done twice in the other units. So we focused on respect, looking after my environment, making sure that we're caring for the environment, which also comes up in the grade 1s. It's just one line, but just so that you are familiar with the fact that it links to what they should have already come to you with. One of the other samples that we could use is a resource called Under One Sun, and you may have that in your schools. You may have heard it and not used it. Under One Sun is an Indigenous resource, and it was designed as a literacy support. It is leveled readers. It goes from kindergarten through to grade 8, but it covers topics of kindergarten to grade 9 in Alberta. And it has some really phenomenal little pieces to it. One of them in this case was kindergarten. You have one in grade 1 as well. It's called Helping Mother Earth. This one was called Thanking Mother Earth. But just the pictures alone, I could use this in grade 1 as well. I see the water moving. I'm in an environment. I can talk about keeping it safe, but now I can also have that conversation about how do you think this would look different in fall? How do you think it's going to look different in winter? Do you think this water is going to freeze? It's moving pretty quick, right? You can have those conversations. So this is a nice little, it's not a cheap resource, but it's a great resource because you get all the readers, you get all the materials that go with it. This one happens to come from a common discussion that you would do with the students. So we would have this up here and we would read through about what does Mother Earth give us? How do we make that connection to land and the environment? And then it talks about how do you care for it? You've got to water your plants, those types of things. Talks about how do we care for the animals. If I don't live in a place where I'd have a big environment of, let's say, bears, I might have a pet. Maybe that's all I'm going to care for, right? And how does my pet respond to the differences in seasons? So all of those different components all build into these pieces as well. These are the books that you can see. Here's the ones for grade 1. They don't repeat in the grades. So we have What Does Mother Earth Share is one that would fit with the ones that we do here. And also We Help Each Other is one that would fit with Mother Earth or looking at environments. So these are leveled readers. You can have them read to the students. You can read them. They can read them however it works. And then there's other resources that go with each one of those. Another book that would be a good resource is called Keepers of the Earth. It focuses on Native American culture. However, the stories that are in here often find their way into Canadian First Nations beliefs as well. And so you'll find in here, there's lots of the myths. They're talking about the animals, they talk about history, they give you lots of stories. So seasons would be in here as well. So you're seeing the front and the back if that's something that you want to add into your school library. The walk is another one. The walk comes from Native Reflections. The walk is one where the students walk through an environment in the storybook. It also focuses on the Grandfather 7 teachings. So talking about humility, honesty, courage, which is the bear again, right? The bear is another piece that fits into these. They're all interconnected to the land. So again, it's another one where we can talk about the difference in environments and how those changes occur. And then the last one would be Elders Are Watching, is a book in which it talks about how the elders watch how we look at how we care for our land. So as the seasons go through, are we damaging the land in any one season more than another? Are we depleting it by using something more than another? So that's what the story behind the Elders Are Watching is. So that gives you, I hope, a little bit of a starting point as you start moving through Earth systems and getting them sort of started on the seasons, getting them going on some of those components. Are there any questions at all from anyone? I know that we've talked a lot. We're 8 minutes over. We're 1 minute longer than yesterday. So we didn't do too badly there, Ted, not at all. If not, feel free at any time to just reach out if you have any questions, if you're looking for more resources, if you need more clarification, don't hesitate to reach out at any time. And I will, before we post this to your website, I will make sure that you have an opportunity, or I will fill in that one site that we had there which didn't have the foldable on it. Is there anybody that's on with us right now who is not familiar with the website that you're going to find your resources in? Does everybody know where to go and get the science resources? That's what I just want to know. I don't want you to leave so that you're saying, okay, she's talking about all these slide decks and stuff we're going to get, but where do we get them? So if you're not sure, just throw it into the chat box, not sure, and I will go there with you right now. If we don't see it, that means everybody's been there and we know what to do. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the January, and we will see you again in March. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Chris. Good night, everyone.
Chris?
Yes, Kat.
When I go to that link that you put in our chat, it tells me potential risk in this link. This website may be trying to steal your personal information. It's a Zoom link.
It's a Zoom link. That's not a Zoom link. Try this one. Here, I'll just put this one in here. Just try www.otc.ca. See if that gets you in there.
There we go. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, the other one, it was just a Zoom link that didn't, like, even when I copied it and pasted it, it still did the same thing.
Okay, so anybody else who's still on, if you had that same problem, just grab the OTC. Just type in www.otc.ca. Just grab that one.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.